A continuación vamos a presentar a Gerhard Pfennig, presidente de EBAR, Artistas Plásticos Europeos, organización que representa los intereses de las sociedades de gestión colectiva de los autores de obras plásticas, en concreto de 25 sociedades de gestión de derechos europeos forman parte de esta organización, que se gestiona el conjunto de derechos de más de 50.000 creadores de los trabajos de obras plásticas, ilustración, fotografía, diseño, arquitectura y otros trabajos plásticos. Por otra parte, el señor Pfennig, entre otras organizaciones, es miembro del Consejo Administrativo y del Comité Ejecutivo de CISAC y presidente del Consejo de CISAC para Artistas Visuales y Fotógrafos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the introduction and the possibility to speak in this eminent forum. I'm starting to come back to the agenda and to give you a more general introduction in what is happening in an area which was addressed as the minister this morning as a transitory period between analog and digital distribution. Firstly, you all know we have still different ways of distribution of protected content, and these ways go are used from different users. The problem being that the general public puts new challenges to us, and we have to face how we can modify this structure and how we can adapt to the new needs of the digital agenda. We have the traditional way of distribution on the basis of license contracts. We have even distribution of works by creators themselves on the basis of Creative Commons and other open access licenses, I think, which is a very important new part of the agenda we have to face and to take into consideration. We have even distribution of works without any binding licenses by creators and by publishers and producers through YouTube and other networks. We have finally a large set of distribution of works on the basis of legal exemptions. And of course, as was mentioned before, we have a lot of illegal distribution. The way this distribution is licensed today, and this is, I think, one of the problems we have to face, are multifold. We have contractual licenses for individual works by authors or by agents given to ISPs and other television stations or other enterprises who use the internet, even for distributing of television programs, as you know, through databases. We have a growing number of contractual licenses by collecting societies for different repertoires, for individual uses. For example, I'm addressing on this slide online art, which is a portal which gives access to works of visual art governed and controlled by collecting societies on a worldwide basis. You can address one database and you can get licenses for works of visual artists for worldwide use on internet purposes. You have, of course, the traditional contractual licenses issued by collecting societies to one user for a large number of users. The traditional licenses given to television stations by musical collecting societies or by other collecting societies. And with the new regime introduced by the EU recommendation on distribution of music online, you have now a number of special agencies, of special groups of rights owners, namely music publishers, which are now taking business in their own hands, partly with help of collecting societies. Those who are familiar with musical uses know this discussed model of CELAS, which is a work of a German musical collecting society on behalf of a big American music publisher. Finally, we have statutory licenses for mass uses based on the model of the extended collective licenses, which will be discussed tomorrow, coming from our Nordic partners. And we have a new stress on developing contractual licenses for mass digitizations. It was always mentioned, the Google problem. If you want to come up with Google and the Europeans want to come up with a Google attack to copyright systems as we see it, you have to issue special licenses for projects such as Europeana, and from our point of view, this can only be done through collecting societies. Problems with licensing. Growing problems, especially from internet users and the development of distribution media. This has been addressed, the problem of orphan works. This is not only a problem of literature. I want to mention this expressively. It is not just a problem of book publishers and writers. It is a problem of illustrators. It's a large problem of photographers whose rights to attribute their name is neglected by publishers of journals and newspapers who just don't mention the name of a photographer who then is cited as an orphan, which he's normally not, or he wouldn't be if his rights to property would be observed. We have the problem of licensing out of print books, books who still exist in one exemplar, but nobody knows where the publisher sits and what's his address and where his heirs and the authors are sitting. We cannot neglect the problem of authors who just don't want to license their works. I know some very important artists who don't want their works to be presented on the internet because they want to be downloaded by others. They just want to be in the internet. There are still people who don't want to be in Facebook, and there are people who don't want their works distributed through the internet. Some consumers don't believe this. Finally, we have publishers and producers who don't want to license because of the same reasons. On the other hand, and this is, of course, part of the set of problems, the interests of users are changing. Interests of users are, of course, growing with the technical possibilities of access to works. And so we all, as consumers, we know the general interest of users is access to all works not without as little payment, but with little payment as possible. There is a mistake in the slide, of course. They want to pay the minimum, if they pay at all. We have additionally new theories in copyright law, in copyright science, propagating rights of users to free access to works and even to modification. And these proposals are now presented to be as implementations to the copyright legislation. I just tell you that we have a proposal of a state in Germany. The justice minister wants to extend the copyright as not just a right to protect works of creative people, but to protect the right of users, of consumers, to access to those works in order to limit rights, property rights, intellectual property rights. This is a completely new discussion we have to face and we have to come up with in order to stay in contact with the general public who is using our works. Then we have a special interest, I think justifies interest in free access to all works in public databases, such as libraries, museums and archives. The general public wants access to storage of society, and I think this is one of the essential items of the agenda, the following agenda of this conference. How do public institutions such as libraries and museums make their content available through the internet to the general public? Finally, if we want to stop piracy and if we want to not to encourage people to take what they can get for free, I think we have to think about possibilities, especially we as rights managers, and I'm speaking on that behalf to you. We as rights managers have to think about models to give the general public easy access to works on the basis of global contractual licenses, which can be issued as by collecting societies or by large numbers of content industries such as film producers, film studios, television stations, or which can even be given on the basis of statutory licenses. My idea is that you can't fight piracy through legislation such as in France or in Great Britain, which is cutting people down from the internet. I think this is a very problematic access. And you see that if you compare the position of other countries, for example, in my own country, in Germany, the government is strictly against any interaction into the internet access of private persons. Even if they are infringing other people's copyright, they don't want to cut people from the internet. So there is a fundamental contradiction, I think, in the thinking of different governments. And so it's a question whether we can fight piracy by just stopping internet access. If you are coming and thinking about solutions out of this dilemma, or if it's not a dilemma, how we can develop a licensing strategy for the future in the interest of rights owners, of authors, of rights owners, of publishers, of producers, and of the general public, we think that for a large number of licensing, collecting societies are a solution, at least for authors who make their living through the use of their work through publishers or producers or through the general public. Only collecting societies, I think, in a broad sense, can offer this service and can offer licenses to the general public, which will really enable them to access to works. We have additionally we have to think about the extension of licensing possibilities for rights managers. For example, on the basis of this model I always mentioned of extended collective licensing, because I think in the interest of a balance, or in the interest of a better balancing of the wish of users to access to works, we have to think about possibilities to make rights owners license their works in an easier way. Yes, I will stay in time. We have to enable, we have even to give incentives to rights owners to license their works, and we have by this, to achieve this, we have to think about new possibilities to make them giving access to their works. Collective licensing, extended collective licensings are a good model if they can be developed on an international level and not just on the level of one country. Finally, if we are talking about enforcing collective management, as a director of a collective society, I'm fully aware of the risk of collective management. Collecting societies are heavily attacked in a European level, from my point of view, often unsubstantified, especially musical collecting societies. But as a matter of fact, if collecting societies have a growing importance, they need a harmonized regime, and they need transparency, they need control, and they need cost efficiency. And control means, from my point of view and from our experience in my own country, in Germany, control by a state agency such as in Germany the Patent Office. And this is possible, and this is good for collecting society. I can only tell you I'm happy that I have a control institution on top of me, and anybody who thinks I'm doing a wrong thing can approach this institution and can say, hey, look at this guy, he's doing something wrong, give me an answer about he is correct or not. For this reason, I'm happy that Madame Gallo announced that Mr. Barnier is now going to present a proposal for a statutory regime of collecting societies. We really need it, and we need it especially when we want more competence for these kind of societies. But in the same time, collective management means a mandatory equitable remuneration of all kinds of uses, because in most cases only a strong rights manager is really in a situation to ask for an equitable remuneration and to collect this. I'm a little disappointed, Madame Gallo, that you said this morning Mr. Barnier is looking into the question of collective management and into the question of orphan works. Before the new commission was mandated, there was a third point on the agenda, which was an equitable remuneration for authors for uses of their works in the internet. I think this is a matter which is of extremely importance, because the internet is not only to the benefit of publishers and producers, it should also be give some financial remunerations to the creative community who is really doing the hard work in producing works. And finally, collective management stands for fair sharing between different categories of rights owners. And coming back to the Europeana project, I already mentioned, it is not just about writers and book publishers, it is also about illustrators, artists and photographers whose works are used in all these projects. Google blacked the images, but images are there and images are very important. And if we think about Europeana and all this and licensing models, we should not forget rights owners such as illustrators or other producers, authors of audiovisual works. Last point of the solutions, we should not neglect that apart from structured licensing, there will be a growing interest and growing pressure on enabling people to propagate and use open access models, especially authors in the scientific field are opposing more and more against the practices of scientific publishers and want enforcement of Creative Commons and open access models. Even this is an area of harmonization of rights, and I think it's an interesting field which we could not leave aside. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I stayed in my time limit.